Hello guys and welcome to Engineering Rebel, and in this video we are going to start building our engine. Now the two things we are going to do is assemble the crankshaft and build the lower part of the block. So that includes the crankcase, the oil pan, and we're going to screw that into the block. So let's get started. So now that we've attached the piston to the crankshaft, now we're going to put in all the bearings, the flywheel, and some of the other spacers and flywheel cover. So this is what it looks like so far. So we have a bearing, we have a gasket, we have a spacer, another bearing, and another spacer on top of that. So now we got to put in the flywheel and the flywheel cover along with some other components. Man, look at this thing. It's starting to get so much weight. So we've already done the crankshaft with the bearings and the little spacers and gaskets, the flywheel. And a cool characteristic of this flywheel is that this will be hooked up to your starter motor. So if I turn it this way, it'll turn. But if I turn it the other way, it'll lock. I'm sure that's for the starter. And this belt would go around it. And, you'd have your little starter motor. Pretty neat stuff. So now we have to add some of the components here, some of the screws and the bolt to lock this in place. And I think we're done with our crankshaft. So as you guys can see, the crankshaft is completely finished. Now I am going to need to readjust the crankshaft pieces itself in order for it to fit precisely into the block. Otherwise, it won't fit right. But before I do that, I'm going to attach the crankcase to the block. This engine uses a gasket that sits between the crankcase and the block. So just for those of you wondering what this little red piece is, well, that's what it is. It's a gasket. One thing that you want to keep in mind is that when you're screwing the crankcase into the block, you want to go in a crisscross pattern. Now, this applies to all the parts for this engine, and even in real life. When you're working on a real engine, you always want to go in a crisscross pattern. So I would go from here to here, from here to here. So it's a crisscross. And here it is. You have the block, and now you have the crankcase, and you could see its little gasket in there. So now we're going to have to put the sleeve into the block and put in the piston along with the other assemblies in here. I'm also going to install the piston ring, and this will keep oil from getting into the combustion chamber. I also disconnected the crankshaft because I'm eventually going to need to adjust it like I've said. And also because typically when you're building a car engine, you would first put in your piston and then connect it with the crankshaft. Also for the crankshaft, I put in these little gaskets, one for this piece and one for this piece as well. So let's attach the crankshaft to the piston. Now that the piston is connected with the crankshaft, now I need to adjust the crankshaft as well as fasten it with this little fastener pin. Now that I've adjusted the crankshaft and put in the little set screw, now it's time to put on the oil pan. So one more thing that we have to do is install this little oil outlet. So when you put oil into the engine, there will be this piece that will eject oil, and it'll go into a reservoir and circulate throughout the engine. So that's what this little piece is for. So let's install that. So this is what the engine looks like. I have to be honest, it looks pretty cool. As you guys can see, as I turn the crankshaft, the piston goes up and down. My goal for this video was to build the crankshaft, have the lower part of the engine assembled like the crankcase and the oil pan, And I would say that I achieved that in this video, and it's working perfectly fine. You could see how the piston goes up and down. So, you would have your intake stroke. Then as it moves up, your compression stroke. Then your power stroke. And finally, as the exhaust valve opens, your exhaust stroke. And these slits are to dissipate heat. Got your oil pan. And I have to be honest, it looks pretty good. Here, I'll give you guys one more look how it works. Now I have to hold this sleeve because the head isn't installed yet. That will be for the next video. But yeah, it works perfectly. So that wraps it up for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. It was definitely a lot of fun to make. I am very excited for my next video where I get to build the head of the engine. But otherwise, stay in tuned, and I will see you guys in the next one.